totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. Subscribe and follow on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, where you get videos weekly. Links to all the social media sites at bookedonrock.com. Author Andrew Wilde returns to the podcast, this time to talk about his brand new book, The Allman Brothers Band, Every Album, Every Song, part of the Sonic Bond Publishing On Track series. The story of the Allman Brothers Band is one of triumph, followed by tragedy, followed by a remarkable comeback in the wake of that tragedy. As it's stated in the book's overview, the music of the Allman Brothers is the pure distillation of the four main ingredients of American music: blues, rock, jazz, and country. At their best, they transcended genre. They just were. The Allmans, one of my all-time favorite bands. Couldn't wait to talk about this band's amazing history, the legendary Duane Allman, his brother Gregg, who along with his bandmates Dickey Betts, Butch Trucks and Jaimoe, carried on in the wake of Duane's passing and shortly after bassist Berry Oakley's death. It wasn't easy. They went through a rough period in the late 70s into the 80s before marking their comeback in the late 80s, a comeback that sustained right up until the death of Gregg and Butch. We'll cover the legendary albums At Fillmore East, Eat a Peach, and the members of the band who joined in later years, including Derek Trucks and Warren Haynes, who helped to rejuvenate Gregg and his bandmates in the late 90s into the 2000s. A playlist of the Allman Brothers Band can be found in the show notes page. But first, here is Andrew Wilde. Andrew, hello again. Great to have you back on the podcast.
Hey, good to see you, Eric. How are you? Greetings from UK.
Congratulations on another amazing book. I've told you how big of a fan I am of this band,
Yeah.
so it was just a pleasure to read. In fact, John Linsky had some nice things to say about the book.
Yeah, so John was one of my early contacts. John, for those who may not know, is he runs or helps to run the Allman Brothers Museum in Macon, Georgia. And he was very kind enough to open up their vaults, so we got some nice photographs from them. He read the manuscript before it was published. Wow. To make sure, that the facts were there. And I believe the book's also for sale in the shop there at the big house in Macon. So that's all great.
Right. And he was the publisher / editor of Hitting the Note magazine.
Yes, he was. He was for many years. Yeah, I've got a great big box of them here if anyone wants them.
Oh, cool. Yeah. He says, quote, "The Allman Brothers Band was a band like no other, and this is a book like no other. Andrew Wilde has produced a work worthy of the ABB's Hall of Fame status. His focus on detail and facts is astonishing. What Andrew has chronicled for the likes of the Beatles, Eric Clapton, Pink Floyd, Queen, and Fleetwood Mac has been done again in spades with the Allman Brothers Band on track." In your introduction, you wrote, quote, "At their best, the Allman Brothers Band transcended genre. They just were." That's a great quote. Can you explain a little bit what you meant by that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, some people kind of get hung up on musical genres, right? Is it blues? Is it country? Whatever. And I don't care about that, So the Allman Brothers, to me, they kind of get lumped in with a very vague kind of southern rock label, right? Which I don't like, because I think they were much more than that. They could play the blues, they could play country, they could play jazz, they could knock bands like Wet Willie and Lynyrd Skynyrd off the park, and I love both of those bands, So for me, it's either music you like or it's music you don't. Who needs labels?
Yeah, the jazz aspect of the Allmans fascinates me. That's such a cool aspect of this. You got, like you say, it's not southern rock 100%. There's elements of all types of music and backgrounds.
American music.
Let's talk about their origins, where and how they form, and how does Gregg Allman eventually get on board, because he wasn't part of this from the ground level.
No, that's it. So Gregg and Duane were born in Nashville, which is a surprising fact, both born in Nashville, 1946 and 1947. I guess better known because they moved to Georgia and Florida later on. So they moved to Florida in 1959 with their mother, and that's where they started to play music. And one night they were taken back up to Nashville, to the Municipal Auditorium in Nashville, Tennessee, to see a show by Jackie Wilson and Otis Redding. Can you imagine seeing those guys when you're kind of 15 years old or whatever they were? And then they'd been playing music then, and that was the time where they decided to turn professional, become musicians as a living. And they played in lots of bands in Daytona around that time. The Kings, the Uniques, the Shufflers, the Misfits. all kinds of these terrible early 60s names. But their first professional band was called the Escorts, which is very funny to British listeners because the Escort was this terrible car of the 70s. But anyway, the Escorts.
Okay, because here it's a hooker.
Exactly.
So either way, it's not.
Either
really
way, it's not a great name, is it? And the Escorts, they covered the Beatles, Joey and the Pacemakers, Searchers, these kind of very British invasion sound. I think in summer '65, they renamed themselves the Allman Joys. Now, that's another kind of pun, which means nothing to British listeners, but the Allman Joys. And around that time, they met on the kind of circuit a drummer called Claude Hudson Trucks, who comes into the story a little bit later. So the Allman Joys, as they were, they gigged everywhere. They evolved into Hourglass and got a record deal with Liberty Records in Los Angeles. So this is Duane and Gregg and three other guys. This is mid-1967. And the Cards, they were making a scene. They opened for Big Brother and the Holding Company, for Jefferson Airplane, for Buffalo Springfield, big bands of the day. But Liberty Records never really understood what the Hourglass were about. They were a terrific live R&B band, but their albums, if you've heard them, are just very flaccid and tame and not particularly great. So they were disillusioned. They disbanded. Gregg had an obligation to stay in Los Angeles to record a solo album to fulfill the contract with Liberty Records, but Duane returned to Florida. He met Claude Hudson Trucks, or Butch Trucks, as we all know him today, worked with that band called the 31st of February. And then Duane became a session player. And this is where he really came into his own. So he worked on Wilson Pickett's Hey Jude. Go away and listen to that.
Yeah.
Right? Absolutely unbelievable. That was late 68. And then Duane did sessions with Arthur Conley and Aretha Franklin and King Curtis and all these amazing players, mostly in New York, mostly for Atlantic and these kind of big labels. But Duane missed playing live, right? So in early 69, he recruited a couple of guys he knew, a drummer called Jaimoe and a bass player, Berry Oakley, and had a little trio with those three guys there. Oakley was the bass player in a band called Second Coming, and two people in Second Coming, a guitar player called Dickey Betts and a pianist, Reese Winans, also kind of jammed with Duane, Berry, and Jaimoe from time to time. And then on 23rd of March 1969, Duane called together his favourite players, Butch Trucks and Jaimoe on drums, Berry on bass, Dickey on guitar, and Reese Winans on piano. Right? That was the first, if you like, session for the Allman Brothers Band as it would become. Now, there's a name there that's very definitely missing. Where's Gregg? So Duane called his brother up, who was still in Los Angeles, and Gregg flew back or hitched back or drove back or blagged a ride or somehow went back to Florida. And then the actual definitive lineup played together for the first time on the 26th of March, 1969. And Reese Winans was played with Boss Skaggs and Stevie Ray Vaughan and eventually rejoined what was left of the brothers very late on. But the band, that great initial lineup, was then complete. So it was kind of a long and winding road of meeting people, working with people, but all the time, and this is really very important, the driving force was 100% Duane Allman.
And then as we would read in Gregg's book, he thought about becoming a dentist, maybe, just as the backup plan, or an oral surgeon or something. Yeah, that's funny. The band's self-titled debut, released November of 1969, one of my all-time favorite Allman songs is Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
A version of that song recorded on the first day of recording sessions, Wednesday, August 3rd, 1969. A week later, they recorded the classic version. And you say in the book that it is perhaps the most important song on the debut. Can you talk about that and the Miles Davis influence and what inspired Gregg lyrically and why Dickey Betts isn't on the solo? That's the other thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I was trying to introduce a newbie to the Allman Brothers Band, then it's probably Dreams from that debut album that I would turn them to. Now, the verses are based on a very simple two-chord organ pattern, which just switches between two chords with a very insistent bass guitar behind. Now, all of this is, let's say it was borrowed from a tune by Miles Davis called All Blues, which is from Kind of Blue. It also shares a very similar mood and tempo, and you can actually sing the Allman lyrics over all blues as well, if you want to. So it's a very, very big influence. The lyrics, okay, just one more morning, I had to wake up with the blues, pulled myself out of bed, put on my walking shoes, went up the mountain to see what I could see. The whole world was falling right down in front of me. Such visual, poetic lyrics. But what Gregg says in his memoirs, the book's called My Cross to Bear. It's worth a read. He says this, and I'll just read a little section out. He says, at the time, I was staying up at Julia Brose's place. She was very pretty, and she lived up a Laurel Canyon in LA. You'd go up there, and on this little hill was a tiny shack, just big enough for a very romantic hideaway. When I was staying up there, when I woke up, my eyes would open. I'd be looking down the mountain, and if it would be raining, there'd be mudslides. And that must have been in my mind when I sat down to write Dreams. The world was falling down right in front of me. Very visual lyrics. Now, you also ask why Dickey Betts isn't included on that. Now, Betts didn't like Atlantic Studios in New York, where the album was recorded. He didn't like the setup. Thought it was a very dead studio, dead in terms of sound and so on. And he basically walked out of the sessions the day that Dreams was recorded. So all of the guitar you hear on Dreams on the Allman Brothers debut album is Duane Allman's playing.
Yeah, another track on this album that would become an essential part of the Allman Brothers catalog is Whipping Post. Yeah. Gregg Allman almost quit the band over this song, which I didn't realize until reading your book. Can you tell this story?
Yeah, so Whipping Post was originally a slow bluesy ballad. And when they were rehearsing the song in Jacksonville, Berry Oakley, the bass player, he asked to take the song away. And overnight, he kind of reworked it with this very odd time signature of 11/8. So 11/8 time, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2. Right. So the introduction is in this really bizarre time signature, and Gregg didn't like it. He was ready to pack his bag and go back to Los Angeles. I mean, it's a classic, right? We all know that. But by all accounts, Gregg wasn't happy that his song had been changed so much. But they played it that way for the next 50 years.
The band's sophomore album, Idlewild South, released September 1970, reaches number 38 on Billboard. The title coming from the band's nickname for a cabin they use for rehearsals. And you include a quote from a member of the band, Cowboy Scott Boyer, who signed the band to their label Capricorn Records at Duane's suggestion, by the way. And he said, quote, "It was like a hunting cabin. The back of the house had a porch that was built out over a man-made lake that was maybe 5 or 6 acres. It was a cabin made out of old pine wood, and it had been there for a long time. The Allman Brothers use it as a rehearsal facility, that and a place to maybe go consume a little something that wasn't quite legal."
Yeah.
There were parties out there, he adds. The legendary Tom Dowd produces all but one song on this album, which includes a few more Allman's classics, Midnight Rider, In Memory of Elizabeth Reed. Gregg Allman said, quote, "Midnight Rider hit me like a damn sack of hoe handles."
Hey.
Can you talk about the lyrics? Kim Payne's help with the third verse specifically, and the legend behind when the original recording of the song took place.
Creative people tend to work whenever the muse strikes, right? So you might be lying in bed at night trying to get to sleep and something comes into your head. And I think this is what happened here. So Gregg wrote the song late at night. His friend and the band's roadie, Kim Payne, was with him and helped to finish off that third verse. So Kim Payne came up with that line, "I've gone past the point of caring, some old bed I'll soon be sharing." Great line. And he was given co-writing credit just for that rhyming couplet there. But once the song was written, Gregg wanted to record it straight away. He wanted to record it immediately, just get it down as a demo. And as legend has it, he and Payne rounded up Jaimoe, the drummer from the band, and their fellow roadie, Twigs Linden, and broke into Capricorn Records in the middle of the night, recorded the song with Gregg on 12-string, Linden playing bass, and Jaimoe on drums. I know we've never heard that version, but it's a classic song, one of my favorites, Midnight Rider.
Not anywhere on any bootlegs, anything? No.
I don't think it's ever been found, no.
There are some recordings on YouTube I recall listening to. I don't know if it was that album. No, I think it was a different one, early versions of... Not Melissa. It was one of the Dickey songs. It's
Blue
just
Sky,
the band,
I think.
Oh, Blue Sky. You're right. Blue Sky. It's on YouTube, and it's just the band jamming. Yeah. In Memory of Elizabeth Reed is the first original instrumental by the band, and it's also their best. What did Dickey Betts have to say about the origins of this song?
Yeah, interesting story. So at the time, Betts was involved with Boss Skagg's girlfriend, Carmela, illicitly. Little cloak and dagger romance, Dickey called it. And I mean, I don't know, but they'd meet up in a graveyard by the river in Macon, which is called Rosefield Cemetery, which is a part of the band's history now. But Betts used to like to go there to write songs. And he wrote this tune for Carmela. And when he wrote it, the gravestone next to where he was sitting happened to say, "In memory of Elizabeth Reed." And that became the song's title. And of course, Rosefield Cemetery, you can still go and see Elizabeth Reed's grave. We can also see the graves of 4 of the Allman Brothers Band as well, who are all interred in the same place.
I got to tell you, Andrew, when Dickey came to Connecticut here, where I live, back in my radio days, I got to introduce Dickey Betts. And I got to meet him before the show. And I asked him, "Can you tell me the story of Elizabeth Reed?"
Yeah.
He starts telling me the story. And I'm in such a trance. I'm like, "Oh my God, Dickey Betts is telling me this story." Like I remember bits and pieces of what he told me, but I'm just looking at him like he's just telling me the story. He was a cool guy. I know the band had their battles with him, but he was really cool. Came out there, played a great show. He is still with us, but I know he's having some health struggles. So
he's retired now. Dickey's retired. I mean, he's nearly 80 years old.
Right.
And he had a bad fall a few years ago. But I chatted to John Linsky about him. And he's still there. His son, of course, he's picked up his mantle now and he's carrying it.
Right. His son and Gregg's son, right? They have the band together.
They do.
Yes.
The Allman Betts Band, which is Dickey's son and Duane and Gregg's son.
Yeah, I definitely got to see those guys because they tour quite often. What follows is what is considered one of the greatest live albums of all time, At Fillmore East, released in July of 71, reached number 13 on Billboard. Recording during 2 nights, March 12 and 13, 1971, at the Fillmore East in New York City. The opening track, Statesboro Blues. Great story behind this one. It's originally written by American blues guitarist Blind Willie McTell, recorded way back in 1928. The 1968 version, though, is the one that stands out. That's by Taj Mahal. That was a huge influence on Duane. The slide guitar on the track performed by Jesse Ed Davis. There are 2 stories behind the origins of Duane learning slide guitar based on the 68 version, and you get into this in the book. And one is a tall tale involving a pill bottle. There's another one. Can you talk about both stories and what's the real story?
Well, I think there are possibly 3 stories that kind of move together here. But as the story goes, Duane taught himself to play slide guitar on his 21st birthday. So that would be 20th of November, 1967, when he's recovering from an injury to his elbow. Apparently, Gregg bought him a birthday present, the self-titled debut by Taj Mahal, which includes Statesboro Blues, and also a bottle of coracidin pills, painkillers. And as the story goes, Duane emptied and washed out the pill bottle and used it as a slide on his finger to play along with Taj Mahal's version of Statesboro Blues. Nice story, although that album wasn't released until 4 months after Duane's 21st birthday. So that can't be true, right? But it's a nice story. Duane himself said in an interview that he picked up the slide after listening to Ry Cooder. But then, Ry Cooder wasn't really playing slide in 1967-68, it was Jesse Ed Davis who was playing with Taj Mahal at that time. And although Cooder and Taj Mahal did play together, the timelines don't kind of mix. And then another source says that Duane wanted to play after hearing Beck's Bolero on Truth by the Jeff Beck Group. But that was released in July 1968, by which time the Hourglass had split up, and we have recordings of Duane playing slide with Hourglass. So maybe the real story is kind of an amalgamation of all of those.
Yeah, and he didn't Duane go see Taj in concert?
I'm not quite sure of the date of that, but I think it was potentially a big influence on the way that he did that. And of course, Duane mastered that instrument. The slide guitar is very difficult to play because you need to mute the strings you're not playing with your following finger, with your slide usually on your ring finger. And technically, it's difficult to do it, but the sound is incredible. And that Fillmore East album is an absolute total masterclass in control and technique of playing the slide. You have to listen so closely when it switches from playing standard fretted to slide in the middle of a solo, and he does do that. It's absolutely incredible. It sounds brilliant.
Yeah, as we know, many of the Allman songs are even better live, and In Memory of Elizabeth Reed is one of those examples, the 13-minute version from the live album. What are some of the influences we're hearing throughout this track? You break it down in the book.
Yeah, I do break it down minute by minute almost, because to me, it's 13 minutes of absolute pure genius. We mentioned earlier Miles Davis, in particular, Kind of Blue, so from 1959. But I think you can also add to that John Coltrane, who worked with Davis extensively, actually, as well as a solo artist. You listen to My Favorite Things or Love Supreme, 2 albums from the 60s by John Coltrane, you kind of get the feeling and the tone and the mood of the way that The Memory of Elizabeth Reed moves out. I think what's really important is, you think of All Blues, I mentioned All Blues by Miles earlier, that's elements of rock going into jazz music. But Dickey Betts used the complete opposite approach by using jazz rhythms in a rock instrumental, right? So Jaimoe, who was always a jazz player, really put to great use in a track like In Memory of Elizabeth Reed. And generally what they would do, Butch Trucks would keep the rhythm and Jaimoe would just play around the rhythm with his drums. Absolutely classic, the Allman Shuffle, the way they did that. And then to add to that, Dickey Betts wrote this harmonized guitar lines in the main theme. So Dickey and Duane are playing 2 quite different separate guitar lines in harmony with each other. And that comes from Western swing music. So fiddle and bluegrass use that
and kind of a Glenn Miller feel too. Like
almost as well. So you can imagine that you mix Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Western swing, bluegrass, and rock drumming and bass playing all in one track. And that's In Memory of Elizabeth Reed. And if you listen to that on the Fillmore East album, at the end, there's silence because the audience do not know how to react. They're absolutely stunned by what they've heard. And then it takes them a few seconds to go, oh, man, that's great. And then the applause starts.
Yeah. I remember the Rolling Stone article one of the guys in the band talked about those shows. And by the time the show would end, the sun was coming up. They just jammed endlessly. Yeah. At Fillmore East was released July 6, 1971. It was shipped gold on October 25th. And 4 days later, Duane Allman is dead. There's a line in the Allman song from 1994, Soulshine, where Gregg sings, "Life can take the strongest man, make him feel so alone." And I thought about, I wondered if Gregg was singing about his brother there. Can you take us back through that day, October 29th, 1971? What happened? The band was back in Macon for a break, right? Duane had just returned from New York City.
That's right. So some of the band's friends were together planning a surprise birthday party for Berry Oakley's wife, Linda, who lived at the big house. Duane spent the afternoon there at the big house with the Oakleys. And from what we can tell, around 5:30 p.m., he set off back to his own house on his Harley Davidson to collect some presents and a cake for the party that was due later. And I believe he took a shortcut along Hillcrest Avenue, whereas everybody else who was following him in a car took the more direct route. And as he approached the intersection there with Bartlett Street, a truck pulled in front of him. He swerved to avoid it. When underneath his motorcycle, was knocked unconscious. He was taken to the medical center of Central Georgia, a couple of miles away, but he died of massive internal injuries after 3 hours of surgery. He was 24 years old.
Just a kid.
A kid.
Yeah.
Same age as my daughter.
Oh, man. Yeah. The whole band's devastated by this. Somehow they move forward, though. And instead of disbanding, it's moving on and making music that Gregg says that's the only thing they could do to deal with the pain. And so we get Eat a Peach, which was released on this month 51 years ago. Yeah. Actually, February of 72. So, this is the anniversary of the album. A huge hit reaching number 4. Initially called Eat a Peach for Peace, based on Duane's stock answer to any interviewer's question about how the band was helping the late Vietnam-era revolution. The band records 3 new songs for the album, which includes Melissa, Les Brairs in A minor. Did I pronounce that right? Les Brairs.
Yeah, Les Brairs, yeah.
And Ain't Wasting Time No More. Gregg wrote the lyrics for that song after Duane's death, and I love the story behind how Gregg finally finished the lyrics to Melissa. What did he say about how he came up with that name, Melissa? Because that wasn't the initial name he had in the song.
That's true. But before I talk about that, Eat a Peach, that's not the full quote. So the full quote was, "Whenever I'm in Georgia, I eat a peach for peace."
Ah, yes.
the Georgia kind. He's not referring to fruit there.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
Melissa, yeah. What probably my favorite
Sex, drugs,
song
and
by
rock and roll.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Or as we say in the UK, sex and drugs and sausage rolls. That'll mean nothing to you guys. So, Melissa, probably my favorite song, acoustic kind of song by the Allman Brothers. It's great to play as well. Great to play on the guitars, open E tuning. So he's told this story a few times actually. But what I'll do, I'll read a little bit from his memoirs about Melissa because it's a fun story. He says, and I quote, "I wrote that song in 1967. I got so sick of playing other people's material, I just sat down and said, okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3, we're going to write some songs." And about 200 songs later, he said, I wrote this song called Melissa. The first one he kept as a song he was pleased with. He said, I just started strumming it and hit these beautiful chords. It had everything but the title. I thought, okay, back home we always run to Sweet Barbara. No. Diane. No. Sweet Bertha. No. So he says he just kind of put it away for a while. And then he says, one night I was in the grocery store and there was this Spanish lady there and she has a little toddler with her and this little girl takes off running down the aisle and the lady yells, "Oh, Melissa, come back, Melissa." And I went, oh, that's it. So come back home, I was run to Sweet Melissa.
That's just a fantastic story. Where is that little girl, Melissa? Does she even know that she inspired one of the greatest songs? That? Yeah. The monumental jam titled Mountain Jam is on Eat a Peach, recorded at Fillmore East. And you say it's possible we hear a Grateful Dead influence. Where do we hear that?
Yeah, I think so. So there's a very long instrumental jam triggered by the flute introduction to the Donovan song, There Is a Mountain. So that's why it's called Mountain Jam. But it's entirely possible that Duane borrowed that famous lick from the Grateful Dead. If you listen to Anthem of the Sun, there's a track on there called Alligator. It predates Donovan's song, and that same riff appears around 9 minutes into that song, Alligator. So listeners, go and have a listen to that and see whether you think there's a possible link.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. The Allman's classic Blue Sky. So here we go. This is where now Dickey Betts starts to take on a bigger role in the band in terms of songwriting. And he wrote this one, sings lead vocals for the first time. And it's written about his native Canadian girlfriend, Sandy Blue Sky. I believe it's
Try it.
Wabagijig? Anyway, written about his girlfriend.
Canadian. If we know a native Canadian, we can ask one. We can ask.
Yeah.
I don't know any.
Yeah. But I want to ask you about the instrumental Little Martha. Duane's daughter, Galadriel, had a wild story about a dream Duane had that led to the riff.
Yeah, so the dream went like this. Duane walks into the men's room in the lobby of a big hotel, such as a Holiday Inn. There was Jimi Hendrix. Okay, this is a dream already getting pretty wild, right? Duane had heard that Jimmy had died and wondered if they were both in heaven. So Jimmy waves Duane over to the sink, and with a big smile so we could see every one of his teeth, Jimmy bent down towards the tap, the faucet, American listeners, and he gently turned the faucet. And as he did this beautiful guitar riff came floating out and bounced off the white tile walls around them. And that allegedly is the melody for Little Martha that was given to Duane Allman in a dream by Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, it's a total 60s story, man. That's cool. She wrote a book, right? I think that's from her book, Duane's.
Yeah, it's a quote from her book. Yeah, she's quite touching, actually. It's worth a read.
Yeah. Gregg Allman later said, "The truth is that Berry Oakley's life ended when my brother's life did. His death almost identical to Duane's. What happened to Berry?"
So Berry Oakley really looked up to Duane Allman and took Duane's death, very hard. So he suffered quite badly from depression over the course of the following year. To the point, actually, that from time to time he'd been replaced by some live gigs by roadie Joe Dan Petty, who later went on to some success of his own. Berry was also drinking. 2/5 of vodka a day is a lot. Berry died in a motorcycle accident in Macon, 4 blocks away from where Duane had passed the previous year. Accidental, tragic. Berry's grave is next to Duane's in Roseville Cemetery in Macon.
And they were the same age, 24.
Yeah.
And
they died of very similar injuries.
within
internal
4 blocks
injuries
of each other.
within 4 blocks.
Yeah.
Almost exactly a year apart.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Now, we should mention they were really tight. There was just something that he just could not handle, that death, and the other guys were able to move on. He just couldn't.
Well, you could possibly argue that the drug habits that some of these guys got into in the mid-70s may well have originated in Duane's death as well. So people obviously handle different things in different ways, and some people got lucky and stayed alive longer.
Now, what is the story about Duane Oakley? Right, there was Oakley's had a girl. He had a girlfriend from California, Julia Densmore, who was pregnant
he did
at the time.
He did. Duane Oakley was born about 6 months after his father's death. So his mother was pregnant with him at the time. Berry had a secret girlfriend, John Densmore of the Doors. It was his wife, incredibly.
Oh, wow.
He used to go back up to California to meet her, and if you see pictures of Duane Oakley, he's the absolute spitting image of his father. It's very scary, and he's a great bass player too.
Oh, is he? Okay. Once again, the band forges on. August of 1973, they released Brothers and Sisters, which includes Ramblin' Man and Jessica. Lamar Williams joins the band to play on all but 2 tracks, Wasted Words and Ramblin' Man. Ramblin' Man goes all the way to number 2, most commercially successful song in the Allman's catalog.
Yeah.
Some interesting stories behind the lyrics in your book. Dickey literally spent a lot of time in the backseat of a Greyhound bus as a kid, so that's where that lyric comes from. Traveled a lot since his dad often moved locations for work. He worked in construction. You talk about the ending, the extended ending, that intricate section inspired by a classic Derek and the Dominoes song. And who is it that we hear playing the second guitar part?
Ramblin' Man ends with a very intricate 2-guitar play out. And that was inspired by the end of Layla, the track Layla by Derek and the Dominoes. Derek Trucks, of course, getting his name from the same place, named by his parents after Derek, from Derek and the Dominoes, also Eric Clapton. And Derek Trucks eventually toured and recorded with Eric Clapton many years later. So yes, it was inspired by the end of Layla. Betts added that long ending to the song to try and take it away from being a kind of a straight country song. Wanted a second instrument on there and recruited his friend Les Dudek to play with him, and kind of reworking and reinventing that twin guitar harmony sound he'd forged so well with Duane Allman. So in a way, it's a tribute to Duane as well.
You also quote Dickey when talking about Jessica, the story behind this Allman's classic. Can you talk about this one? Who is it about? And can you talk about that interesting jazz and classical influence on this track?
The song is named after Dickey Betts' daughter. Her name is Jessica. She was born on 14th of May, 1972. And he wrote the song. It's an instrumental, but it's quite a light and kind of bouncing instrumental. And he wanted to get the feeling of the innocence of Jessica's personality as a small child. But a couple of very clear influences, really, and Dickey has spoken about these. I mean, the first is the influence of the jazz guitarist Django Reinhardt. And if you try and play the melody of Jessica, you can play it with 2 fingers. And Django Reinhardt famously only ever played with 2 fingers because he had fingers missing in his hand. The other inspiration is perhaps a little bit more unexpected. Betts spoke extensively about the 18th century German composer Johannes Brahms. So everyone listening to this is going, what? Brahms? And apparently Betts enjoyed listening to Brahms and heard musical ideas in there. And the first time that happened, Betts thought that Brahms was stealing his guitar licks, but they both thought the same way in terms of melody and harmony. And of course, Brahms was 200 years gone by the time Dickey was writing Jessica. But incredible how this kind of cross-pollination of different styles of music all came together.
That's the beauty of the Allman Brothers Band. That's just a combination
Absolutely.
of all the influences. Although 1975's Win, Lose, or Draw reached number 5, the cracks are starting to show within the band. The live album Wipe the Windows, Check the Oil, Dollar Gas. Now, I don't own this album, so I should give it a listen because you say it's worth listening to. Because
it's terrific. It's terrific, Eric.
It's the band with this lineup at its peak, right? This is Chuck Leavell, Lamar Williams.
That's it. And they only repeat one song from Fillmore East, so it's not like going back and revisiting the past glories. There's only one track that's on both. And I really enjoyed listening to Wipe the Windows, Check the Oil, Dollar Gas, researching this book. And I recommend go and listen to it. I think it's on YouTube, so you can go away and listen. But it's the band in their kind of 1972, 73 absolute peak.
The decade finishes with Enlightened Rogues, released in February of 79.
That was a reunion after the band had split in 76. So they came back together in 79 and recorded the album Enlightened Rogues.
Which did pretty well, though. They had Crazy Love, Can't Take It With You.
Yeah, the album was top 10, right?
Top 10. And they recorded a couple albums to start off the 80s, 1980's Reach for the Sky, and 1981's Brothers of the Road.
Don't bother with those.
No. And it would be another 9 years before we get another Allman Brothers Band album. So they called it quits again in 82.
Yeah.
The members occasionally regroup over the next handful of years. Gregg has his surprise hit solo album in 87. Nobody expected that. That single, I'm No Angel, is such a great song. But the Allman Brothers Band story is not over. What sparks that second reunion, and who do we see join the band for this next era of the group?
So since Brothers of the Road, Lamar Williams, who was the bass player from 72, from 76, he died from lung cancer. That was in January 83. And that same year, Dickey Betts, Chuck Leavell, and Butch Trucks teamed up with Jimmy Hall from Wet Willie. And they were in a band called Betts, Hall, Leavell, and Trucks. Sometimes a young guitar player called Warren Haynes would guest with Betts, Hall, Leavell, and Trucks. At that time, he was the guitar player for David Allan Coe, a controversial character. After Betts, Hall, Leavell, and Trucks, Gregg formed his own band, the Gregg Allman Band, and had that hit with I'm No Angel, as you say. And Dickey Betts also formed his own band. And throughout most of 86, 87, the two bands, they teamed up for an American tour. They played with each other, separate sets, and then had a kind of finale at the end where both bands joined forces. So although technically that wasn't an Allman Brothers Band reunion, audiences were receptive. There were a couple of official Allman Brothers shows in 1986, the Charlie Daniels Volunteer Jam and the Starwood Amphitheatre in Nashville. And they also performed at Madison Square Garden. So by the time the 20th anniversary of the band was coming along, it would have been March 1989, the band and their management company agreed to put together a box set. So if you remember, in the second half of the 80s, this was All the Thing. Eric Clapton's Crossroads box set opened the doors to having multi-CD retrospectives, and Dreams was one of the first of those. So a box set called Dreams, four CDs, released in 1989, and the band reconvened for a concert tour to promote it. So we've got Gregg Allman, Jaimoe, Butch Trucks, and Dickey Betts, the original four members who were still alive. They were joined by three others, most importantly, Warren Haynes, who they knew. And Warren Haynes is the single most important character, I think, in the last 30 years of the band. And again, they were back to those two guitar arrangements for the first time since Duane had died. So absolutely back on the road and doing well at the end of the 80s and beyond.
That box set I have, that Allman's box set.
Yeah.
You have that one?
I do.
That, and I didn't even know Gregg had recorded the Beatles song Rain. And my God, that is just, that is to me better than the Beatles version. Sorry.
Well, steady on.
But no, it is powerful. And that's also, I believe, where you can hear some of the Allman Joy stuff.
They're available in many places, but there are tracks there by the Allman Joys, the 31st of February, the Hourglass, and quite a few solo tracks from Dickey, from Gregg.
Yeah,
it's a great kind of retrospective. It kind of stops in 1989, which is a shame because they made another, I think, 4 or 5 albums after that and toured consistently after that. So it's not the full story, but right. It's a good overview of the first 20 years or 25 years.
Let's get to those albums. 1990, 7 Turns, a return to form for the band. Good, clean fun, 7 Turns. The title track.
Yeah, that's it.
Great song. They get heavy airplay on rock radio, and the addition of guitarist Warren Haynes and Alan Woody on bass re-energizes the band. April of 1991, we get Shades of Two Worlds featuring End of the Line. 1994 is Where It All Begins, including Back Where It All Begins, another great classic Dickey song, Soul Shine, No One to Run With, which is one of my all-time favorite Allman songs. Great start to the decade. The Allmans are back in full force, but still there were problems, mainly with Dickey Betts. This was the last studio album the band recorded with Dickey. He was with the band until 2000, but things seemed to get worse with each passing year. What ultimately leads to Dickey's departure?
So Dickey Betts' last gig with the Allman Brothers was at the Midtown music festival in Atlanta on 7th of May 2000. I guess he was drinking too much, playing too loud, performing erratically on stage. The band wanted to get him into rehab. And as the story goes, Betts' manager sent Betts a fax to say they would dep him or replace him on the forthcoming summer tour. Just for the summer tour, they wanted to put somebody else in place. But Allman and Betts spoke on the phone. Betts quit. And that was it. He never again performed with the Allman Brothers Band. And they, as a group, never again played Rambling Man. That was the last time it was played on the 7th of May 2000.
Well, I think it's also important to note that Gregg, by this point, has gotten himself clean and sober.
Yep.
So that makes a difference because he's now hearing what his bandmate sounds like. That was what Gregg was going. Like Gregg said, he doesn't even remember the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that speech he gave. That he took when I interviewed him, he said, "I don't remember any."
You can see that on YouTube,
Yeah.
and you can understand why you can't remember, because he was in some other place entirely.
So I think he was hoping Dickey would clean himself up too. He didn't, and we never saw him back in the band. There was yet another resurgence, though, thanks to a 19-year-old prodigy named Derek Trucks. And you quote Gregg Allman, who said, "Do I believe in reincarnation? After seeing Derek Trucks, how could I not? He not only had the skills to play like Duane, but Gregg added, quote, sometimes I'll catch him out of the corner of my eye, and the way he stands looks just like my brother." Mm-hmm. When and where does Gregg discover Derek Trucks?
So I'm going to go on record and say that Derek Trucks is hand down the best guitar player I've ever seen.
Wow.
And I've seen Eric Clapton, Carlos Santana, B.B. King, Stevie Ray Vaughan. I've seen Eddie Van Halen. I still would stand by that Derek Trucks is hands down better than all of them. I actually think he's a better player than Duane himself. Now, a lot of people will be shaking their head and thinking, who is this idiot and what's he talking about?
But the emails are coming in. Here we go.
I'm sure they are, but
no, he's phenomenal. He really is phenomenal.
Because
slide guitar, it doesn't get better.
No, actually, and the reason is this. I think there are two ways of being a musician. You play above the neck or you play below the neck. Now, what do I mean by that? Above the neck means you're playing with your head, technically proficient, but not necessarily with a great deal of heart. Below the neck, it's all about feeling and touch, right? And different people like different things. David Gilmour plays below the neck. Joe Satriani plays above the neck. That's just my view, right? I think Eddie plays above the neck and Stevie Ray below the neck. That's just my view. And Derek plays for sure totally by feel. And you watch him play, and I've seen him play. I've been 30 feet from the guy watching him play, and his touch is just perfect. He'll play a lick and he'll slightly adjust the tone on his guitar because it's too high or it's too low, and he'll carry on. And he never overplays. And to say that a guy can play a 10-minute guitar solo and doesn't overplay might sound like a contradiction in terms, but that's just how I feel. And he's an absolute prodigy. In 1990, when Derek was like 9 years old, Butch Trucks, who's his uncle, took Gregg Allman, Alan Woody, and Warren Haynes, so three of the band, to a club gig in South Beach, Miami. And according to Gregg, Derek just blew the roof off the place, aged 9. You just can't imagine. And then some years later, Derek was invited to play with his uncle in a band called Frockwings, which is where I first have heard of him. It's a jam band of the late 90s.
Right here down the road from me. Toad's Place,
they are.
in Connecticut. Yeah.
That's it. Now, Derek first sat in with the Allman Brothers in the summer of 98, so before Dickey Betts left. Joined the following spring, 99, so played with Dickey for about the next year. And then at that time, Warren Haynes had temporarily left the band. So it was Derek and Dickey, the two guitar players, and Duane stayed then, right to the end, all the way through to 2014 when the band called it quits. I cannot speak highly enough of Derek Trucks as a musician.
Did Warren Haynes leave to form Government Mule?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Okay.
So in about 97 or somewhere around there, and partially because of disagreements with Dickey, I believe that he found it difficult to be in the same band and more to go away and concentrate full time on Government Mule. And eventually, of course, he was able to do both.
So the Allmans released the studio album Hitting the Note in 2003. The lineup: Gregg Allman on lead vocals and keyboards, Oteil Burbridge on bass, Warren Haynes and Derek Trucks on guitar, Jaimoe, Butch Trucks on drums. And then we have Mark Quinones on percussion. Top 40 album, reached number 37. The lead single was Firing Line. The track Instrumental Illness, nominated for a Grammy. How do you feel about the last ever Allman's studio album?
So yes, track for track, I think Hitting the Note might be the best, strongest and most consistent studio album since Idle Wild South, which was in 1970. So All Before My Time, Firing Line, Instrumental Illness, as we mentioned, a killer track called Desdemona, which is incredible, especially the live versions. If you can track one of those down, it's absolutely singing it from the bottom of his feet. It's incredible. So they're all potent and compelling Allman Brothers Band songs in my mind, and they can sit absolutely with their best stuff. And those songs they will play throughout their set list right the way through to their final gigs.
Are you a fan of Gregg's solo work?
Yeah, to a degree. I enjoy it. It's a little less, I always thought it was a little less considered and a little less fluent, if you can be both of those things together. But the guy had a great voice. But I like to hear him with his Hammond organ. That's what does it for me, those two things together.
I felt like his voice got better as he got older, to right up until his health started to decline, and then it was weakened by that. But he got through that last album he recorded. I think he recorded that album while his health was fading, if I recall correctly.
That is particularly good. That is his final one. Is terrific. It's called Southern Blood.
Southern Blood, yeah. He passed away in 2017, but the band retired in 2014. Gregg kept busy, solo projects, while the rest of the band members moved on with their own bands. Butch Trucks, what a shock, took his life January 24th, 2017. 5 weeks later, Gregg was gone. He lost his battle with liver cancer. If someone asks you about the Allman Brothers Band, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Tragedy and redemption, I think. You know, how they could lose two key members in 1971, 72, but then somehow become the biggest band in America in 1973. As I say, at the top of my book, they headlined the Watkins Glen Festival, the biggest single audience for one concert ever to have taken place in America. They were top of the bill there, ahead of Grateful Dead. And then they lost all of that within the next few years due to drugs, alcohol, arguing, record companies wanting to turn them into the Doobie Brothers and so on and so on. But for them to then return with Derek Trucks and Warren Haynes to become once again one of the best live bands in the world is an incredible story. We won't see their like again.
The book is out now, the Allman Brothers Band, every album, every song, right? Through Sound Publishing, available wherever books are sold. And where can people reach you online?
So if you want to talk to me, you can find me on Facebook. Andrew Wild Author is my page. And fingers crossed, if you go to the Big House Museum in Macon, Georgia, you can pick up a copy there, because it should be on sale there now, if not before too long. My books are available on Amazon. And if you're in the UK, go to Burning Shed and pick them up from there.
I'd like to put a link up to that museum too in the show notes page. So yeah, Andrew, thanks so much. I have a feeling this won't be the last time you'll be on. More ideas?
There's plenty in the pipeline. Yeah,
right.
Plenty in the pipeline. What I'd really like to do, and I'm trying to persuade my publisher that next year I should write a book called Live from the Fillmore, which covers all of the great albums that were recorded either in the Fillmore West or the Fillmore East, of which there are many.
Yes. What come to mind? What's the ones that at the top of the list for you? Obviously the Allmans, but
the Allmans, Derek and the Dominoes at the Fillmore, Miles Davis, Grateful Dead, Big Brother and the Holding Company, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. They go on and on. So
you would want to get into the venue itself, the history of it, people that work there, et cetera, et cetera.
The chronology of the artists that performed at those two venues and the great albums they released over the years. I'd really like to do that, but we have to persuade my publisher that that's a good idea first.
All right. Got to get that book. That would be a fascinating read.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah, Andrew, thanks again. I will talk to you soon.
Absolutely, Eric. It's always a pleasure. Take care, my friend.
That's it. It's in the books.